There we go. So now we are delighted to welcome Ghislaine.
Ghislaine.
Ghislaine, sorry. Ghislaine Maxwell. Ghislaine Hubbard.
I got out of jail just for you tonight.
We just talked about that really just before the conversation, and we said, gosh, I'm going to make that, and I did. So sorry, thank you, and welcome again to Ghislaine. Hubbard, who trained as a graphologist 20 years ago while working as an international journalist. Over the past, she's become a full-time graphologist and present handwriting analysis workshops and lectures to international corporate clients, including Google, Microsoft, Facebook, and Pinterest. But I'll let really Ghislaine to tell us more about it herself. So
yes.
I'm going to pin you there so everybody can see you.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Jean-Francois. It's really nice to meet you all. I think I'll start off by saying there is a work side to what I'm going to talk about tonight, because if any of you are young enough to remember, or should I say old enough to remember the 1990s or even the 1980s, any jobs in kind of middle or senior management, you had to do a handwritten letter and you'd send your CV, and those handwritten letters would go off to graphologists. So by the time you got to your interview, they would have looked at your handwriting, and they'd say things to you like, yes, I can see you get a little bit impatient, don't you? You know, that kind of thing. And I think it's obviously quite intrusive, handwriting analysis, but it's incredibly, it tells you a lot about the person. So what I want to do tonight is to give you a presentation, take you behind the scenes, and really show you what it's like from a graphologist's point of view to look at someone's writing. What are we looking at? What do we see when we look at it? Have you all got a sample with you of your own handwriting? It would really help, you know, if you have got a sample in front of you, because as we go through the presentation, I'm going to show you what the various aspects of handwriting mean. Well done, Jean-Francois. I've got your sample. If anybody doesn't have a sample, just grab a piece of paper and write a couple of sentences and sign and date it, and that will do you fine as we go through the presentation. Before I start, I just want to say you're obviously more than welcome to put things in the chat, but please forgive me if I don't see. I might just not be looking when you write it. I get carried away when I'm presenting. So if there's something particularly important you want to ask me, or you need something repeated, just like wave your arms around or shout out, and I'll be very happy to you know, answer your questions as we go along. So let's go ahead. Let's share the screen. Let's download it. And let's get started. Oh, where is it? I see something there that I didn't want to see there. I see the wrong screen there. So I might have to just fiddle about a bit. So ice creams will be served in the interval while I just fiddle about and bring this Google Slides up once more. There we go, right. Okay, now hopefully we can now share it. Share screen, here we go. I've got it twice now. It was there before, but never mind, we're here. So handwriting analysis is something that used to interest people years and years ago. So for example, Aristotle used to talk about the fact that you could tell something of a man from his writing, and he used to call it brain writing, which was pretty accurate. But it wasn't really until about 200 years ago when this massive explosion in an interest in psychology hit particularly Europe, really, that handwriting analysis became something that people studied. And how it started really is that you had all these psychologists who were looking at samples and researching and honing methods for researching matters to do with the mind. And a small subsection of them decided to specialize in handwriting analysis. So they were psychologists to begin with. And that really explains why handwriting analysis is quite heavily influenced by people like Freud and Jung. Now, I funny enough, belong to the American Handwriting Analysis Federation. You might well think, you know, isn't there one in London? There is one in London, but the American one is very active. And I meet with them every week, and we talk about handwriting. We go through samples together, and it keeps me on my toes. So it's a great little organization. And it's headed up by Sheila Lowe, who's an English woman who lives over there. And she writes books on handwriting analysis. She also goes to court, and she will look at, she will be an expert witness looking at things like forgeries and, you know, giving her expert opinion on things like that. And she describes handwriting analysis. She says, as you guide the pen across the page, it's as if you're drawing the observer a picture of what's going on inside you from moment to moment. I quite like the way she puts it, because it kind of focuses on the fact that a snap, you know, when you write something, it's a snapshot of who you are, where you are at that particular moment in your life, and your handwriting obviously can change. Now, before I start talking about what I see in handwriting, I'd really like you to have a look at this piece of writing. It's written by a schoolboy. He was 12. He was in his class. Clearly, he was told by his teacher to write lines, and he had to write, "I'm much too noisy for my own good." And I'm just wondering if any of you can pick up an idea of what sort of boy he might have been. When you look at where someone puts their words on the page, you're actually getting a parallel to how they behave in their environment. So what do you see about this boy from this sample of his writing?
I could see, if I can reply to your question. It looks like Jean Dubuffet was one of the main French artists of the art brut, meaning that a production from a confused spirit and from people in asylums in the insane. This is the type of production I have seen in museums. I don't know if the poor boy is insane or has problems, psychological problems, but this is what I have seen as exhibits in art brut museums.
I think there are definitely psychological problems like ADHD. Absolutely. Anybody else? Does he leave any space?
Very little.
Very little. So if you were his teacher, what would you imagine he would be like as your pupil?
I would imagine he may be loud, noisy, busy, lots going on in his mind.
Yeah.
Also creative though, because it kind of has a flow to it. I'm maybe reading too much into it.
No, I don't think you are reading too much in. I think all the points that everyone's made are excellent points. But the thing that really jumps out is that this boy doesn't leave any white space at all. So I imagine when he's in his classroom, he's not going to allow the teacher really to give any attention to any other students, and he's going to dominate the classroom. You know, now the opposite would also be true. If any of you occupy a tiny little space, a tiny little area of your page with your writing, that's the opposite going on. That's you, if you like, standing aloof. It may be aloof because of shyness. It may be aloof because you're not particularly interested in perhaps what's going on. But the first thing we look at as graphologists is how much space you take up on the page. Now, part of that is your left-hand margin. And if you think about it, when you were a kid at school, you'd be given an exercise book with a little pink line down the side. Do you remember those? And the teacher would say to you, you know, what you need to do is every time you finish the line, you need to go back to that margin again. So we've all really absorbed into ourselves this first rule of writing, which is that even though you don't have an ink margin, we maintain our own margins, and many of us throughout our lives, you know, we have this quite straight margin all the way through our lives. But of course, not everybody. So what does it mean if you have a margin? Well, your margin is the rule of law. And when you see that someone's maintaining quite a straight margin, what you do know is that they're quite law-abiding. If you're looking in a corporate sense, you've got someone with a straight margin, you could probably rely on the fact that they're going to fit in with corporate norms or be willing to do so, because it's really a sign of someone who wants to do the right thing, who wants to fit in. what about somebody like Michael Jackson? I mean, as you can see, it looks as if his dog's had a few bites, doesn't it, out of his margin here. And this is a reflection of the fact that he's going to set his own rules. He's not overly concerned with fitting in. And I'm sure you can imagine if he was working with you in your organizations, he'd be something of a maverick, wouldn't he? He'd be doing things his own way and not necessarily the way that you'd want to do it. Now, the next thing we look at is the amount of space that's left on the left and the right-hand side of the page. And space on the left-hand side of the page, the left-hand side of your page is your past and how you feel about your past. So if you're like Mary Shelley and you leave quite a lot of space on the left, really what you're showing is that it's almost as if you're putting a buffer between yourself and a past that might well have been painful. In Mary Shelley's case, she didn't get on with her stepmother, but often you'll find that when people want to leave their past behind them, they will put quite a lot of space on the left-hand side of their page. The right-hand side represents the future. So as you can immediately see, Mary Shelley did not have any problems about the future at all. In fact, she was sort of mad keen on it. She wrote Frankenstein. It's often been said to be the first sci-fi novel. And so she was clearly very forward thinking. But actually, as you can see, if you look at the words that she's actually squashing in on the right-hand side of the page, she's not just interested in the future, she's running into it pretty much with her eyes closed. And the problem you've got when you've got someone who squeezes their words in on the right is you've got someone who's impetuous, who's impulsive. She's running forward, she's not looking where she's going, she's not planning. Now, I don't know what your writing is like when it comes to the space between your lines, but I'm hoping that you don't have this level of tangling. I mean, this is Elizabeth Taylor. She was writing to Andy Warhol. She kept very exclusive society, didn't she? But what you can see here is that she's got some really bad tangling between her lines. So what does this mean? Well, when you start to have tangling between your lines, it's an indication of the fact that you're beginning to get muddled. You're not thinking objectively anymore. Almost always you've taken on too much. Maybe you're one of these people who says, oh, I'll do that. Yeah, and I'll do that as well. And I can squeeze that in as well. And you end up in crisis management mode. And it's like you're trying to keep all your dishes spinning all day. So all your energy is going into keeping the dishes in the air rather than actually giving the correct attention to each of your tasks. So if you do start to see tangling in your writing, you know, I doubt whether you'd have it as bad as her, but you might have a descender that's touching a letter on the line below. And that is your early warning system, just to say, look, be careful, you're trying to do too much. It might be a really good idea if you reassess what you can achieve in a day. The space in between your words, it tells us something else again. It tells us how much space you want and need between yourself and other people. So where you have someone who tends to keep people at very much at arm's length, you're going to see wide spaces between the words. And if you have someone who's got very tiny spaces between the words, this is someone who they don't have any problem being close to people all the time. In fact, sometimes if those words are really close, this might be someone who's invasive of personal space. Now, the example that I'm giving you here is Prince Harry. And if you look at the spaces between his words, I think you can probably already tell that they're wide. But if you want to be scientific about it, what we say is, if you look at somebody's lowercase m, so the word much, which is his last word, look at the width of his m, it's about that wide, yeah? And then look at the width between his words, about double. So what we see from his writing is he's a person who does want to keep people at arm's length. He doesn't feel comfortable having people all up around him the whole time. And actually, I love this picture because it shows him sort of going like this, doesn't it? He's getting invaded, his space is being invaded by, I think this is his grandfather, if I'm right. Now, this is Meghan Markle's writing. What a difference, eh? What a different kind of writing. Now, the reason I'm showing you Meghan's writing is because I want to tell you about what the space within the words means. This isn't the space between one word and another. This is actually the space within one word. The easiest way to see whether your own writing is cramped is really to ask yourself, does it look as if someone squeezed it in? Meghan's writing, I think you will agree, it looks as if someone's got the word and gone like that And so it's kind of elongated, it's got taller than it would otherwise be because it's squashed in. So what does this mean, the fact that her words are very squashed? It basically tells us how much inner tension there is within a person. So somebody who's nice and relaxed is going to have writing that's relatively broad, not sprawling. Someone who's got sprawling writing is probably the kind of person who comes in and puts their feet up on the desk. But, you know, a nice width in writing would suggest a relaxed person. Certainly, if you're writing, it looks a little bit like this, where you look at where she's written understanding, you can really see the tension in that. And that signifies there's something anxious going on inside Megan. Any questions? Is it clear as mud? Is everyone okay? Yeah? Okay.
Yeah.
Now, the slant of your handwriting, it tells us how emotionally responsive you are. And you might be thinking, well, why are you showing a picture of Reese Witherspoon? And it's really because in the English language, we don't have a word for emotionally responsive. I bet they do in German. They have words for everything, don't they? But really, emotionally responsive is a combination of warm, open, welcoming, friendly. It's all those kind of things rolled into one, which I think, you know, comes over with this picture. And when we're looking for emotional responsiveness in handwriting, we're looking at slant. We're looking to see how your writing is slanted. And let me show you, I'm going to show you some examples of slant. But just first of all, if anybody is left-handed, do we have any lefties here? No. Okay, it doesn't actually affect slant, even if you are left-handed, because your slant is dictated by what's going on inside your brain, rather than, you know, whether you're using your left or your right hand. Now, the first slant I want to show you is the upright slant. And this is a sample from Emma Watson, who played Hermione in Harry Potter. And I think it's really interesting because Hermione was very cool, calm and collected, wasn't she? She was the sensible one and the boys were a bit silly in comparison. Her head was ruling her heart. And you can see in her handwriting here that this upright writing is exactly those things. It's someone who's cool, calm and collected and who's in control of their emotions. I suppose somebody who's more rational in the way that they approach life. And it's interesting that they did actually pick her. They got an actress whose genuine personality resonated with Hermione's. Now here's someone, Abraham Lincoln, whose writing is surging forwards. You can see it tipping forwards. So we know from his writing that he was an American president who really made decisions emotionally and then probably afterwards would intellectualize them and justify them. Whenever you see handwriting that is tipping forward, you've got someone who really makes decisions with their heart. And not to say they don't use their mind, but their heart steps in first, and then they'll bring the mind to bear as well. What you don't want is someone whose handwriting is so far forward that it's almost falling flat on its face, because there you'd have somebody on emotional overload. Now, it might be that your handwriting is backward leaning. And again, there's a slant here. So we've got an emotion going, you know, an emotionality going on. But because it's backward leaning, what it's telling us is that the person is protecting themselves. They're pulling away from you. When you meet them, you might find that they seem a bit reserved because it feels as if they're pulling back from you, just as their writing pulls back. And the reason they're doing it is self-protection, because the most important thing for them is not to have people seeing exactly how they're thinking and feeling all the time. They don't want that. Some people with backward leaning writing are incredibly chatty, incredibly gregarious, but if you listen to them, they won't talk about themselves. Now, if you're thinking about recruiting or taking people on to work with you and you want to have a look at their handwriting, those three slants are fine. This is the, if you like, the one with the red flags. It's the variable slant. It's writing which is all over the place. Instability shows through in writing in many ways, but one of the key ways is that the slant is forward and then it's backwards and then it's upright. It's all over the place. And just as the writing is all over the place, so the person is also all over the place. And you know what you'll find with this kind of variable slant writing is that, first of all, you won't know where you are with the person. They're unpredictable, but also they can be moody. Any questions at all on that? Okay, moving on to size. Does size matter? Well, there are benefits to small and there are benefits to large. So if you look at the size of somebody's writing, it's like a spectrum really. And on one end, you've got the teeny tiny writing, the one where you need a microscope. And these guys are very, very focused. They're good at working on their own. They're really into facts and figures. They don't care if they don't associate with other human beings while they're at work. It's fine. So probably working from home would probably be great for these guys. They don't make silly mistakes because they're good at focus, but they're not so great at standing back and looking at the bigger picture. At the other end of that spectrum, you have people with huge writing, and these are the extroverts. They really love to be with people. They're going to get very bored and frustrated when they're on their own. And these guys, the mistake that they could make is that they're so busy looking at the bigger picture that they neglect the finer details. I think the reality is most of us, I mean, I get sent a lot of samples, and most of my samples are very much in this middle range. And so those of us in that middle range, which is probably most of us, we've got the capacity to do both. We can concentrate and we can be gregarious as well. Now, again, I'd like to ask your thoughts on this piece of writing before I say too much. But what I would like to draw your attention to is the baseline. Now, the baseline is the line that you write on, and it represents your footing in life. That's what it actually means. So you can look at your own baselines and see what your own baselines are. I don't want to say too much before you've had a chance to comment on this sample here. Does anybody like it? Does anybody dislike it? What are your thoughts on it?
I remember seeing someone at school that used to use a ruler to write, and I'm imagining that's probably what's happened here.
Andrew, what sort of person were they?
Oh, it's hard to remember who it was now. It was a long time ago.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, were they somebody who was quite controlled in what they did and how they behaved?
I can only imagine possibly, yes. I wouldn't mix
too
with
long
people
ago.
that wouldn't. I wouldn't mix with too many people that are erratic. I was too erratic myself, maybe in those days.
It wouldn't be erratic. It wouldn't be erratic.
No.
Anybody else got any comments on it? Thank you, Andrew. Does anybody think it's beautiful? Sometimes my guests do think it's beautiful.
It look a bit.
I hope that you're going to go on to, you can tell whether this is written by a man or a woman, because I would say this is a woman's writing.
Well, this is written by a woman, but the interesting thing is you can't tell if something is written by a man or a woman. I mean, there is feminine style and there is masculine style, but you can't tell if writings. So we always ask, well, ideally people give their age, their sex, and whether they're left or right-handed. Those are the three things we ideally would ask for. It was a woman though, and it does look womanly. Okay, I'll tell you what I think of this writing. This is somebody who's over-obsessed with control. This baseline is rigid. And, you know, I said about your baseline is your footing in life. Obviously, you don't want an erratic baseline because you're going to be all over the place. And we know that instability in handwriting is a reflection of instability in the personality. So having said we definitely don't want an erratic baseline, the point is we also don't want a rigid one, because the rigid one is the other end of that spectrum again. A rigid baseline is someone who is scared of everything going out of control. They want to impose control. There's so much self-discipline going on that it's going to stop them from being creative. It's going to really hamper, you know, everything they do really. And they might well be like a pressure cooker, and it builds up steam, and then boom, you know, one glass of wine and it all comes out. So very rigid writing again is a bit of a warning sign. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't particularly want to work with someone who is this rigid. Now, the pressure or the depth of your handwriting shows how intensely you feel your emotions. These are the people who see, you know, intense, heavy writers are the people who see life in glorious technicolor. They're often artists, and their feelings go really deep, which is great. But at the same time, when you have someone's feelings going really deep, they can hold on to grudges. Now, if you're wondering about the pressure in your own writing, you can usually sort of feel on the back of the page, an indentation. And of course, if you've got really heavy writing, you're going to be gouging down, applying a whole load of pressure to the pen, and it's going to mark through the paper. Now, what I've just been talking about is the Gestalt side of handwriting analysis. And I've got my eye on the clock because I know we've got a hard stop, but I wanted to tell you something about trait stroke, because the Gestalt side of handwriting analysis is where you sit back and you look at the bigger picture. And I do genuinely believe that even if you're not a graphologist, you can all, after the, when you see a piece of handwriting, when you receive Christmas cards, you can have a look at it and you can pick things up from that writing that are going to make common sense to you. But the trait stroke school is the opposite. It's where we hone in on the tiny, tiny details. And with this one here, this is a circle at the beginning of a letter. It's complete, clockwise, and very small, and it means jealousy. Now, if you just had one of these in the big, big sample of handwriting, what you might say to yourself is, okay, this person has got jealousy within their nature. It may be latent. It might be something they never show. If you see it 3 times, you're going to be saying, oh, yeah, jealousy is going to be in that person's personality. And of course, if you see it 12 times, then you run, because that's a lot. It's going to be dominant. So I'd like to show you just a little bit about the Tbar. That's the trait I've chosen to show you tonight. The reason I've chosen to show it to you is the Tbar is your willpower, and the Tbar lives on the T, the letter T, and the letter T represents how you manifest in your environment. So if you want to see what someone's like at work, look at their Tbars, because the Tbars are their willpower sort of manifesting in their day-to-day life. Now, when you look at this first pair of Tbars, I'm sure you're thinking, oh, there's the intense sort of heavy Tbar there. And indeed, this is someone who, if they're going to do a project with you, they're going to bring their whole self to it. They're going to be passionate, they're going to give all their stamina to the project. But the problem is it might be a bit overbearing. It might be a bit too much. So you might be thinking, I want you involved, but not that involved. This very light Tbar is the opposite problem. The person says to you today, oh, I love the idea of your project, I want to get involved, but tomorrow, oh, sorry, I've got other things I need to do. So they don't always carry on their commitments. These are very similar. The very long Tbar is a wonderful sign of enthusiasm. It's the #1 indicator of enthusiasm, which is, I'm sure you'll agree, very underrated. But this particular one, it's so long, it's almost becoming overbearing. And again, the opposite of a very short Tbar is telling you that the person may not, carry on with their goals. They may drop their goals. Now, the direction of your Tbar talks about your temperament. And when you have one that's going upwards, what you're seeing is optimism and a positive attitude to life. What about when you see a Tbar slashing downwards? Well, this is the #1 sign of someone who dominates, someone who uses their willpower to control other people. It doesn't sound very nice when I say it like that, but it's actually a leadership trait, of course, because we need to bring people with us when we're leading a team. This one here, do you remember what we were talking about, the left being the past? So this one here is someone who kind of makes a decision and then they go, oh dear, I'm not sure. So they're constantly undermining themselves. This is a bit of a negative trait. The placement of your T tells us about your temperament again. And this is, I suppose, the gold star at school. You would earn it, wouldn't you, for putting a very precise Tbar. But we're not at school anymore. We're adults. We haven't got time, if we're writing a long letter, to slowly, cross all our T's perfectly. So I wouldn't expect people to have a perfect T, to be honest, because I think there's more important things to do. These Tbars that come off slightly to the left, they do betoken impatience, but I don't think it's serious impatience unless the Tbar has actually left the T stem. When you see a Tbar floating ahead of its stem, then you've got someone who has got a propensity to lose their temper. They can be explosive. So that's the temper T. If you ever hear people talk about the temper T, that's it. And the opposite is the case when the Tbar isn't actually meeting the Tbar isn't actually meeting the T stem. It's lagging behind, and that's someone who procrastinates. Now, the height of your T-bar tells us much about your ambitions. The higher your T-bar, the more ambitious you are. But when you're looking at your own T's, what I would say is try and ignore the ones that lead into the next letter. So a lot of us, when we write the word the, we start off with, we do the T stem and then we do the T-bar and it goes straight into the H. So that's going to govern the height. So try, when you're looking for height, to see how ambitious you are, try and look at the T-bars that are unassociated with any other letters. Now, I very much doubt that any of you are going to have a whole page full of very, very low T-bars down here. If you did, what I'd say, of course, it means you haven't got goals. But what I'd say is that it could be there's a self-esteem issue going on, whereby you don't set goals because you don't, you don't believe in yourself. So these are the heights we'd want. This height, this is a T-bar, the height is the top of the middle zone, and that's low practical goals. So that's great. And this one is high practical goals. It's above the top of the middle zone. These are great. This one here, I'm not saying it's not great, but I'm saying it's difficult to achieve because it's right on top. It's right up here. Martin Luther King had these. Fine, he achieved his distant goals, but these are very distant and not all of us can achieve them. So you're setting yourself quite a task if you're going to have all your T-bars way up at the top of your T-stems. And what about this one? Now, this has actually flown off the top of the T-stem, hasn't it? And by doing so, it's lost touch with reality. So this is going to be a dreamer. This is going to be someone who sets their goals way unrealistically. They're totally unachievable. And I just wanted to show you a real piece of handwriting that has these incredibly high T-bars in it. Do you see the word promptly? And you can see this T-bar flying off in the air. And so it goes on all the way through. And this was actually an elderly lady who was a matriarch, and she had incredibly high but very unrealistic expectations of her family. Now, the last thing I'm going to tell you in this part of the presentation is really to ask you something. I'm going to talk to you about signatures, but I want to ask you to imagine that you get a letter from a long lost school friend who you haven't seen for many, many years. And this letter arrives and it's very tiny writing. So you're thinking to yourself, oh yes, this person, John, he's certainly a bit of an introvert. He's got very tiny writing. And then you turn to the end of the letter and his signature really surprises you because it's huge. It's big and loopy, and you look at the signature and you think, hang on a minute, I'm confused. I thought we had an introvert here, and now I'm looking at a very big signature. So my question to you before I move to the next page, because the answer's on the next page, my question is, who do you think is the real school friend? Who's John? Is he the tiny writer, or is he the big, creative, confident, extrovert signature? Anybody want to have a guess? Or do you want me to go on? Do you want me to tell you?
Yes.
Yes. All right, I'll tell you. So if you think about it logically, the writing tells you about the personality. So the fact that John had tiny, tiny writing tells you that he's quite introverted. He's a detail person. He's not an extrovert at all. So what's that signature doing there? Well, the signature is how we want people to see us. It's our social persona. So in John's case, it's this one here. The signature is very different from the writing. And what it tells us is that somebody wants to be seen very, very different from how they really are. They want to project an image that's very different. So when you see a signature that's the same as the handwriting, there's something fairly reassuring about it, because it tells you what you see is what you get. This person is who they seem to be, Having said that, I think if we have a slightly bigger signature, I really don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think it's, lots of us do. We have slightly bigger capitals or a slightly bigger signature. And really, it's a bit like going and buying a nice new jacket, or coming out of the hairdressers and you look great. It's really just presenting your best face to the world. I don't think there's any dishonesty in it. Equally, sometimes you'll see people, they just do a squiggle. And if that's someone who has to sign lots of checks or lots of letters, to be fair to them, it may well be that they just haven't got the time to laboriously write out their whole signature, particularly if it's a long signature. But certainly if the signature bears no relation to the writing, it does raise questions as to what's going on and how that person wants to project. Now, what I'd like to do next, if it's all right with you all, is to give you a chance to be the graphologist. I've got a couple of samples. I've got my eye on the clock, but I've got a couple of samples I'm going to look at in a minute. But I think we've just got time to look at Queen Victoria. And this is a notelet that she sent to a friend. You can see it used to be folded in the middle. It's like a card that used to be folded like a notelet. And I think that a lot of things we've been talking about are showing up in this writing. And I'd love to give you a chance just to get your teeth into it and tell us what you see as to who was Queen Victoria? Who was she really?
Strong, ambitious.
Yes, where do you see the ambition?
I think it's in the T's as well, and the very long sort of strikes around the things, even actually on top of a signature there as well.
Absolutely, very long T's. So she was very enthusiastic, but so long that I think it was a little bit dominating.
True,
just a little bit.
Oh, she was dominating.
And also you mentioned that it's on top of, you're absolutely right at the top of the T-bar. She had high goals. She thought big for sure. Well done. Anyone else?
Seems to be comfortable with the past and the future because it goes from left to right and it slopes forward, so she's looking forward. And
I think you're absolutely right. Comfortable with the past. Wouldn't you be if you'd inherited a crown? Your status, your money, your position in society, everything comes from her past. So naturally she's very comfortable with her past. And you're saying it slopes forward, and that shows us that she's what?
Enthusiastic.
Yeah, emotionally responsive. You know, she's driven by her feelings, and she expresses her feelings. What about her baseline? Does anyone get a feeling of what sort of person?
Very controlling.
Well done, David. Well done. I mean, I think so. This is rigidity, isn't it? So she might have been emotionally responsive, but woe betide you if you spoke, because she's covering the whole paper. Nobody else counts. You're there to listen. She's there to speak.
I'm queen around here.
Yes, absolutely. And it's interesting because it's exactly the same as what that 12-year-old boy was doing. And yet she's the queen. You couldn't get more opposite, but she's doing the same thing. She's taking all the space up. And look at her descenders. Look at this. What's happening here?
Looks erratic. Like hurrying.
What was it, Niall? Do you remember what this was when you've got tangling?
Seems a bit confused.
Yes.
Puzzled.
As we say in London, she was in a right muddle most of the time, I think. You know, she bit off more than she could chew. She was trying to do too much. And it's not surprising when you think about her life and her reign. But she wasn't coping. She was starting to think subjectively. She wasn't dealing with it very well. Well done. That's really great. Just another couple of things I'll tell you about this. Can you see this stroke here? This is called the whip. And it's a bit like, you know, when you're whipping your horse, speed up, speed up. And it's a sign when someone forms a whip-like formation in their handwriting, it's a sign of someone who wants to control and dominate other people. We already know she's dominating from the length of her T's and the intensity of her writing, but she's got, you know, quite a strong, powerful will going on there. She's also got these knife formations. You can see one in the second line. You can see other knife formations all over the writing, really, here and here. And these knife formations are exactly what you think they are. It's aggression. Now, I do a talk on criminality in handwriting. And when we're looking at the handwriting of criminals, what we're actually seeing is effectively real knives. They have stabbed people, they have murdered people. And I'm not suggesting that Queen Victoria had a secret self as Lady Macbeth and went round with a dagger, but I think she could be very cutting in what she said, very cruel in her words. And I think you're starting to see in her handwriting, it's coming to life, isn't it, a bit now? And you're starting to see that she was a very powerful and dominant personality. In fact, she has been called narcissistic. Okay, Now I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to show you in a minute a couple of handwriting samples that I've got, but are there any questions at all before we go on to that? Anybody got any questions?
Yeah. The size of the writing depends on the size of the pen.
That's an interesting one. I mean, I think there are some people like Picasso, they want a big fat pen.
Yes.
Because it enables them to express their intensity.
Because I've always had a big fat pen, and all I've written now was written in pencil underneath it, which is very, very small.
Ah, yeah. But I mean, I think the fact that you've when you choose a wide nibbed pen, there's something in that choice. If you feel comfortable writing with that,
yes,
but yes, it does emphasize the solidity of the writing, what we call the color in the writing.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Can I just check?
I've got a
Yeah, hang on, Andrew. Do you want to go first, then James?
Oh, thank you. I just wonder what evidence base there is for all of these decisions about people's personality.
Yeah, excellent question. What happened is when this was developed in the Victorian era mainly, the psychologists who were developing it were using all the methods that had been, that were reliable. So they were using big samples and they were testing out and retesting. But I think to go beyond that, most of this is common sense. So if we say the left represents the past, the right represents the future, when you're writing a line, you start on the left and you move towards the past. And as you move along your line, those words slide into the past. So a lot of what I'm sort of trying to bring out the common sense side of it. Not all of it makes immediate sense because we've only got an hour, but I think there's a lot of common sense to it. And if you start studying it and you start thinking, if something comes up and you're thinking, why would that be the case? I think the more I look into it, the more I get answers to those kind of questions. James.
I remember at school, I got a pen friend from America, and I noticed that above every I was a big bubble, like a big circle. So I'm just writing, like, for example,
we call it a spotlight.
Like the word division. So you would have DI with it, but each of the I's had a big circle, like a cloud.
It means he was a little bit special. We call it a spotlight. It's like putting up a spotlight, shining the light, and it just means he was a little bit special. Was he?
I never see many people write like that. It's
a reasonable number do. Anything? Yeah, Beatrice.
I just wanted to ask you, so your interpretation, your method for interpretation, if I understand, is based on British Victorians, is it? Or?
No. I mean, most of the people, the founder members of graphology, many of them were German. Some of them were Swiss. There's some Americans that came into play as well. So a lot of them were European, but some Americans as well. Anybody else?
Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask just a quick question. Yeah. Very often, because handwriting has become so rare now, all the young people, they use the computer and so on. There is a degradation in the way people write. And actually, sometimes you cannot even understand the handwriting. And I wonder, how do you deal with this sort of problems?
It's not easy. It's not easy. When I was taught, we would always ask for a sample in cursive. But in some schools, they're not even teaching cursive, particularly in America. Unbelievable, isn't it? Shocking. Anyway, we have to be we have to be realistic. They're not learning cursive, or they're saying, we teach cursive writing where it's all joined up together.
Thank you.
So what happens is we have to, if somebody's under 40, we have to accept, if they're print writing, that this might not mean what it would have meant in the old days. We just have to take that into account.
Okay.
Because what we're looking at is the deviation from copybook. David.
Yes, I was always told as a child I'll make a great doctor because my writing is fairly indecipherable, and it still is. And I write things down and I can't read them afterwards. I can't read them afterwards, let alone anybody else. What does that actually tell you? Are you coming on to that at all?
I mean, I would say
on.
that illegibility can be obfuscation. It can be. I mean, when you looked at Queen Victoria's writing, did she really want to communicate? I mean, I couldn't read her writing. I don't think she cared. I don't know. It might be that there's a part of you that's reserving something and you don't necessarily want to be an open book. But I'd have to see the writing as a whole.
Even to myself.
Even to yourself. But I need to see the writing as a whole. We try and be holistic rather than picking out. It's absolutely impossible to really say too much. But you've got a good margin, I will say that. James, did you want to ask something else?
Yes, I did. I've got a friend that I can always, when I get a letter from him, I won't tell you what he does for a living, but his writing is unique in the sense that if he's, say again, if you did the word division, the dot above the I would be much further over, and all the I. So there's
okay, that's impatience.
Is it?
Yeah.
The dots are never above where they should be. They're always ski with, you know. And sometimes
if it's ahead, it's impatience. It's like that T-bar. You remember the T-bar that's to the right? That's impatience.
This person is impatient.
Okay. Niall, were you going to ask something?
No, but something came to mind. What about using a lot of serifs, so at the end of letters, because I can't leave the end of a letter just hanging there. I need to add things onto it.
Do you? What sort of things do you add on? I mean, a nice long end stroke is generosity, but if it goes like that and then it makes all sorts of folderols, it's unnecessary elaboration, isn't it?
Yeah, a lot of. I think also depends on if you're doodling, you start to add decorations, so that could be part of it.
If it's doodling, it's different, isn't it? Do you find in your signature there's a lot more elaboration than in your writing?
Definitely, yeah.
So that's like, ta-da, you know, that's your public self, isn't it? Anybody else? I'm sure I saw someone, Jeff, or somebody was going to say something. I'm not sure, Andrew. Have you all asked any questions you want to ask?
I've got I just jotted a few notes down prior to, well, as you kind of were mentioning it, and if you can see that.
It's so hard to actually see.
That's my signature.
Yeah.
Does that mean
there's a big circle, and that's self-protectiveness.
Oh, interesting.
But you've got very honest numerals in your date, so you're honest with money, aren't you?
And there's a T in there. So there we go.
I think that might be a knotted T, is that a knot? I think it might be. It goes back and then forward. It could be persistence.
Interesting.
But it's not easy to see it, just, you know, that.
Yeah, of
not
course.
easy.
Thank
All
you.
right, shall we have a look at some? I've got 2 samples here. Oh, I can share my screen this time. I've done something. No, I've done something wrong. Hang on a minute, let's try again. It's because I'm not using my own, here we go, my own Zoom. Okay, so when I first saw Jean-Francois's writing, do you know what I thought of? I thought of fabrics like satin, silk, you know, gorgeous fabrics, a jacket with lovely satin lapels or silk lapels, bow ties, velvet, you know, all this sort of thing. And really why I was thinking of that was these wonderful elaborated descenders and ascenders as well in the writing. This is all a sign, it's calligraphic. So partly the writing, it's about looking good, it's about how it looks, but it's also about making a statement as to what sort of person you want to be. You love beautiful things, you want to be surrounded by them, and that comes over, I think, very definitely in your handwriting. I think I did actually mention when we were talking about the T crossings that when anything goes upwards, it's a sign of optimism. So I would put my money on the fact that Jean-Francois is someone who's going to have a half full glass, not a half empty glass, and is going to see the positive. And then also I noticed when you look at the P.
Oh. You're joking. Something happened to the Wi-Fi stop. Richard.
Sized. Look at these. Oh, the recording's going off and on. I don't know if you can hear me. So yeah, when you look at the upper zone, you'll see it's much, much taller than just twice as tall as the middle zone. And this is someone who's reaching up. The upper zone is the intellect, the mind, goals, dreams, could be even spiritual things as well, philosophy, also the moral imperative as well. And there's this constant reaching up to something higher.
No, my Wi-Fi is gone again.
No.
So,
Jean-Francois, you've just missed your one.
yes, I did miss quite a lot, really, but
But it'll be on your recording.
hopefully so, because I think it probably stopped the recording really whilst you were talking. But I heard quite a lot about it, so it's fine.
Okay, well, just very briefly, it's calligraphic. There's a concern with beautiful things. The upward slant is optimism. The prong on the P is someone who loves to debate. And this very tall upper zone is someone who's reaching for the stars, who's interested in the life of the mind and that kind of thing.
Thank you.
So David's one, I'm spotting the Greek Ds. If we look at this line here, line 6, you can see this last D is a Greek D, and so is this one. And that's the sign of someone who's interested in literature and reading. The open A's, if you look at as requested in line 4, as requested, can you see how open this A is here? It's very, very open. And this is someone who loves to talk, but not just chit chat. They will share their experiences with other people. They're happy to really talk to other people about their experience of life, their experience of work and so forth in a very open way. I know that you're intelligent, David, because if we look in line 3, can you see these really, really sharp points on my?
No. What's bloody happening with the Wi-Fi?
Thing about the signature that would, or is it a different? Ooh, that
Not me. Absolutely not me.
It's not you. It's a David who isn't here, is it?
Yeah.
I don't know whether any of you know the David who's not here, because if you don't, you won't really be able to give much of an opinion on it.
No, he's there. He's there. He's still there.
Oh, he is here.
Yes.
Oh, okay. So, okay.
Sorry, I was muted there, Ghislaine.
Did you want to make any comments?
Yes, no, you're quite right. I sort of get very irritated if people repeat themselves. You're quite in order on everything that you've said, really. And I like to be, quite open and with people and respect them and they respect me.
Yes. Fabulous.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
thank you very much.
Okay, any final questions at all? I hope you found it interesting. What I would say is if you are interested, do get yourself a guidebook, get someone reputable like Sheila Lowe. Keep it in your desk so that you can refer to it when you get the need to look something up. Yeah, go on.
Sorry, I was going to say something. I've had quite substantial businesses, and I've always asked people to write in before I hire them in order to analyze the personalities and the handwriting and to see if they'd get on well with other people, which is why I've always taken an interest in it. I had to, because when I was young, people were trying to financially how can we say it, do you, and you know, try and you know, siphon off money, etc., which wasn't very good. So I did it as a means of protecting myself. So could you give your contact details to John, for fear I need anybody else in the future?
Also, I will give them, because if any of you want bullet points of what we've been talking about today, I can email you the bullet points. And the other thing is, if you're interested, I do a crime and handwriting, which is great. And I also do one like personal one-on-one as well. And I do all these things on Airbnb. But if you want any details, just email me and I'll let you know.
I don't know if you know him. I used to use a forensic graphologist called Derek Davis. He died, unfortunately, if you've come across him. He used to go to courts all over the world.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Interesting.
Could you put your email back again on the screen?
Can you see it there?
I can't see it at present, no.
Oh, can you not get into the chat?
Oh.
David, I'll send it to you by email.
Yeah, okay, thanks, John.
It's a bit of a difficult one to spell. Yeah, so if anybody wants to know more information, do get in touch. But if you've got a call, if you want to do something for your clients or whatever, hopefully you think it makes an interesting hour.
It definitely was, absolutely. I'm sorry that my bloody Wi-Fi is gone again. I'm really quite. I can't believe that.
You said everyone's just sending in emails. You know,
gosh, I can't believe that.
It used to be common and now it's specialist.
Sorry, I just can't believe that really, that the Wi-Fi just came on and off all the time.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry about that. But I'm trying to do the tethering from my phone, but it's not working that either. So I just don't know really what's happening. I'm doomed with these sort of things. Anyway, thank you so much, Ghislaine, really, for the presentation. Thank you very much. Very interesting question as well there. Certainly learn a little bit more actually about it. And it's certainly very good. You gave us tonight. So I'll definitely send the details to David. By the time I'm sure that the internet stopped. I'm going to stop the recording now and saying thank you again, Ghislaine.